The eternal pursuit of happiness is the simplest path to disappointment. The recently begun married life of two lovers came to a tragic end as soon as they moved into their own house. The young man forcefully pulled his girlfriend from the car and led her to a vehicle parked in the driveway. The girl peered inside with horror, and the first thing she saw was blood. Then her boyfriend dragged her by the hand into the house, where an even more terrible scene awaited them in the bedroom. "Would you like something similar to happen to you?" These words stayed with the young woman for the rest of her life. Gail Wingarden was born on April 24, 1965, and became part of a large family of 8 members. Her childhood was spent in Ottawa County, Michigan. The Wingarden household wasn't wealthy, but all children grew up surrounded by parental affection and care. Due to the family's financial challenges, Gail dreamed of finding employment and saving money for herself from a very early age. She told her elder sister Cheryl that she would work extensively to afford anything she desired. As a teenager, Gail secured her first position as a server. Although the cafe's base salary was relatively modest, the young woman managed to earn decent money. She consistently received tips that exceeded her regular income. Gail was charming, exceptionally amiable, cheerful, and determined. Moreover, she was physically attractive, so she never lacked male attention. While working as a server, she frequently interacted with patrons who later wished to pursue acquaintance and would wait for her outside the cafe. Fortunately, Gail had a brother, Ryan, who was approximately 2.5 years her senior. Ryan continuously watched over his little sister and always tried to stay close by. When Gail turned 18, she met a man named Lar, and they instantly connected, quickly moving in together and building a house. Most likely, the girl simply wanted to gain independence quickly, as one couldn't say she was truly in love with Lar. The couple lived together briefly, about 13 months. In 1984, 19-year-old Gail met a 25-year-old man named Rick Brink. He was a contractor, and they met at work. It was love at first sight. Gail was captivated by her new acquaintance, while Rick went home and told his mother he'd met the girl he intended to marry. Gail didn't waste time. After meeting Rick, she finally understood that Lar wasn't right for her, and she had indeed rushed into living with him. Their relationship was far from perfect. The girl directly told him things wouldn't work out, and she decided to leave him. When Gail was gathering her belongings to leave the house, Lar lost control and struck her face, leaving a black eye. Once her older brother learned about this, he appeared at the doorstep and gave Lar a sound thrashing. During this, Ryan made sure to thoroughly explain to the man never to touch his sister again. Just days after this, Gail and Rick Brink began dating, and they could easily be called two halves of a whole, as the couple matched perfectly. They shared identical dreams, similar interests, and matching personality traits. Both were hardworking and ambitious. The lovers spent summer at Rick's family lake house. They went boating and water skiing, spending much time outdoors and with family. 3 summer months showed these two were truly an ideal pair, and eventually their relationship reached its logical conclusion. On April 25, 1986, a day after Gail's 21st birthday, the couple married in a cozy little church surrounded by relatives and friends. Rick and Gail held their celebration at a lakeside club. They danced and celebrated with guests all day, then departed at sunset for a brief honeymoon. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. During their honeymoon, the newlyweds enjoyed the beach, seawater, and sunshine. They had already planned what they would do upon returning home. While the couple indulged in relaxation, their parents concerned themselves with purchasing property for the young family. Rick's father managed to find an ideal house for the newlyweds, situated on 20 acres of land on the outskirts of their hometown, Holland, Michigan. The man arranged to buy the building at an advantageous price. Inside, much work remained unfinished. But Rick worked at a furniture company, was handy, and possessed excellent carpentry skills, so home repairs didn't daunt him at all. Rick, Gail, their friends, and relatives together completed the room finishing, repainted the walls, polished the floors, and installed furniture. They say joint renovation reveals how well people understand each other and brings all disagreements to the surface. But for Rick and Gail, setting up the house only united them and confirmed their wonderful relationship. The newlyweds laughed at all their mistakes and constantly joked. They even recorded their renovation on video. The couple moved into their own house, still not completely renovated, in October 1987. By then, Gail and Rick had been married about 18 months. The young wife shared with her sister that the last room they planned to renovate would be a nursery, because their next step in life together would be having children. Gail excitedly described which wallpaper she wanted to hang in the nursery, where she'd place the crib, and how she'd decorate the bedroom. The couple dreamed of filling their house with children's laughter and toys. They were ready to become parents and dreamed of spending the rest of their lives hand in hand. But unfortunately, these dreams were not destined to come true. On Saturday, November 21st, 1987, Rick and Gail attended one of Rick's school friends' wedding. They had a wonderful time, drank a little, and danced. The Brinks departed for home around 11 p.m., and this was the last time they were seen alive. 2 days later, on November 23rd, neither Gail nor Rick showed up for work. Rick worked at a major furniture manufacturing company and was an extremely reliable and diligent employee. It was uncharacteristic of him to simply not come to work without notifying management. Rick's boss immediately sensed something was wrong. He tried calling the Brinks' home phone to check on them, but no one answered. The supervisor then dialed Rick's parents' number to inquire why their son hadn't come to work and wasn't responding to calls. His father and mother were very surprised. They knew such behavior was unlike Rick, so they called Gail's office. That's when they realized the young woman also hadn't appeared at her workplace that day. Rick's parents and his boss simultaneously arrived at the Brinks house to discover why the couple was ignoring calls. Perhaps they were sick, had overslept, or experienced some kind of accident. Rick's Chevrolet Blazer was parked in the driveway. His father and mother sighed with relief, assuming their son was home. But upon approaching the vehicle and peering inside, they discovered their 28-year-old son's body. He was in the driver's seat, slumped toward the passenger side with his head almost touching the door. Rick's face was covered in blood from a gunshot wound. Horrified by what they saw, the parents didn't enter the house, fearing what they might find inside. They called the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department to report the tragedy. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they entered the house and proceeded down the hallway to the master bedroom. There, officers found 22-year-old Gail Brink's body. At first glance, she appeared to be sleeping with her head under a pillow. But when officers removed the pillow, they discovered its other side was soaked through with blood. The woman had been shot 3 times point blank in the face. This method of execution suggested certain implications. Police's initial theory was that this might have been a murder followed by suicide. They hypothesized that an argument between the spouses led to Rick shooting Gail, then sitting in his car intending to flee. However, feeling overwhelmed by guilt, he ultimately took his own life. But this theory soon fell apart. No weapon was found in the car with Rick's body. Therefore, he couldn't possibly have shot himself or killed Gail. This meant a third person had carried out this brutal attack on the Brink couple. The perpetrator had killed both victims, then taken the murder weapon with them. It was later determined to be a .22 caliber revolver. Like Gail, Rick was also dispatched by a shot to the head. He had 2 wounds on the left side of his head. A bullet hole was visible in the passenger side window, shattering the glass, while the driver's side window was partially lowered. This led investigators to believe the shooter was known to the victims. Possibly, Rick lowered the window to speak with the perpetrator, clearly feeling no threat. This theory was supported by Gail's face being covered with a pillow. Criminals who knew their victims typically did this. Perhaps after the shooting, they felt guilt and remorse for their actions. Additionally, it became immediately apparent this wasn't a robbery. There were no signs of forced entry. Everything in the house remained in its place, all items neatly arranged where they belonged, except for some clothing scattered on the bedroom floor. Rick's wallet was found on the kitchen counter. It contained a substantial amount of cash. Gail's jewelry also remained openly displayed in the house. No weapon or shell casings were found at all. The perpetrator brought the gun, then took time to clean up. There was no physical evidence at the scene, no foreign fingerprints, hair, or anything that could aid in investigating the double homicide. The found fingerprints belonged to the victims. Only one slightly smudged print was discovered in the bathroom, and one on the phone. These weren't in police databases and could have been from guests or numerous relatives of the deceased couple. The autopsy showed that based on body decomposition, death occurred early Sunday morning, November 22nd, shortly after the Brinks left the wedding celebration. Gail's older brother Ryan said he tried calling his sister Sunday afternoon with no answer. This confirmed the approximate time of death suggested by experts. With no physical evidence, investigators began questioning friends, colleagues, and relatives of Gail and Rick. Ryan told police about his sister's ex-boyfriend and their breakup. He mentioned fighting with Lar for daring to hit Gail. Ryan suggested Lar still felt attached to and possibly jealous of Gail. It pained him to learn she had married and was happy. Detectives immediately brought Lar in for questioning and polygraph testing. The man denied any involvement in the murders. He passed the lie detector test successfully. Additionally, Lar had a perfect alibi, so he was quickly eliminated from the list of potential suspects. Several days after the investigation began, the previous homeowner approached the police station. This person, known as Shotgun Sit, was a member of a notorious Detroit motorcycle gang suspected of human and arms trafficking, plus drug manufacturing and distribution. As a police informant unhappy with hallucinogenic drugs being sold to teenagers, he worked with federal agents to report those selling pills to minors. He suggested the perpetrator might have been targeting him, mistaking the Brinks for his relatives. He'd faced multiple assassination attempts and had to defend himself against intruders at the same house where Gail and Rick later lived. Detectives thoroughly investigated the Detroit motorcycle gang, but after a month found no evidence linking them to the murders. The next theory emerged when another fatal crime occurred on Christmas Eve. Just 2,600 feet from Rick and Gail's house, 30-year-old Deborah Wilson, who had attended the same high school as Rick Brink, became a victim. Her husband returned home early morning to find her missing from the bedroom. The lights were on, and the sliding door leading to a large field behind the house remained open. The man called police to report his wife missing while searching the field for traces of Deborah. He discovered her body with multiple stab wounds. Given the proximity to the Brinks' house and that Deborah and Rick attended the same school, police suspected a possible connection. They then linked these deaths to another case from July 1977. 20-year-old Deborah Polinsky was stabbed multiple times in her bedroom, about a mile from the Brinks' home. Police theorized all three cases were connected to a serial killer. Holland was a small town. The population was terrified that a killer who had taken multiple lives walked free. The double murder of the young couple shocked not only the local community, but made headlines across Michigan. Despite detectives' efforts to find connections between all three cases, none were found. All investigations were frozen. The files sat in archives for 2 decades. Friends and families of the deceased began losing hope of justice for their loved ones. 24 years later, in 2009, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department created a new cold case unit. Detectives Dave Blakely and Venus Repper, who had worked together for 7 years, would focus exclusively on solving old cases. They knew loyalties change over time. Those who once kept dark secrets or protected someone often change their minds decades later. people might finally want to rid themselves of years of guilt or view differently those they previously protected. Blakely and Repper started with the Deborah Wilson and Deborah Polinsky cases, but when one suspect died and another confessed, they turned to the Brink murders. First, they reviewed all the case files, double-checking testimonies of witnesses who had any connection to the deceased, and noticed some inconsistency in the account of Gail's brother Ryan Wingarden. His girlfriend Pam, who later became his wife, confirmed that they went to the laundromat that evening. Because the couple ran short of coins to finish their laundry, they stopped by Pam's friend's house near the laundromat to borrow some money, then headed home and spent the whole night together. However, later during the polygraph test, when Pam was asked if she had been with Ryan throughout the night, she answered, "No." For some reason, nobody paid attention to this discrepancy. So the new team of detectives decided to call in Pam and Ryan for questioning again to get to the bottom of everything. Sometimes a thin thread helped unravel difficult cases. In fact, Gail's brother and his wife were never considered suspects. It's just that during investigations, everyone is typically asked a standard question. What were people doing during the hours when the crime occurred? By now, the Wingardens had been married for 23 years. They had 3 children together, and Pam's son from another partner. Her son was only 6 months old when Ryan proposed to her. Detectives Blakely and Rapper went to the Wingardens' house to talk again with both Gail's brother and his wife. However, husband and wife repeated that they went to the laundromat in the evening and spent the night together. They couldn't remember anything else from that evening. In reality, the police had nothing to hold against Pam, because anyone could forget what they said 20 years ago. The detectives couldn't obtain more information about the case, but this inconsistency still bothered them, so they decided to take a closer look at the Wingarden couple and talk to other people from their lives. The investigators were certain that Pam was hiding something. Digging into Pam and Ryan's past, the detectives discovered that in 1987, when the crime occurred, Gail's brother was dating 2 women simultaneously. One of his girlfriends was named Crystal Bann, and the special unit officers decided to locate Chris and ask her several questions about her former boyfriend. It turned out that Chris and Ryan had split up, but remained on good terms, almost like friends. The woman didn't provide any additional information regarding Wingarden. The detectives were about to leave when Chris told them there was one thing she hadn't mentioned. In her opinion, Ryan treated his sister Gail somewhat differently than his other sisters. Sometimes he made such inappropriate comments about her that it became clear he was attracted to Gail as a woman, even despite their family ties. Once, after his sister and her husband's death, Ryan confessed to Chris that he had had an intimate relationship with Gail. It started when his sister was 9 and he was 12 years old. The man claimed these were consensual relations, except for the last time. Gail said no, but he forced her. Detectives Blakely and Rapper couldn't believe that 9-year-old Gail could have entered into any consensual relationship. Most likely, she became a victim of controlling behavior and manipulation by her older brother. Then Chris described how Ryan showed her a photo from an outing where he and his sister were boating. Gail was in a bikini, and the man characterized her as hot and alluring. He looked at his sister's photo with lustful eyes. It was this gaze that led Chris to conclude that Ryan had inappropriate feelings toward Gail, clearly experiencing emotions far from brotherly. However, the ex-girlfriend's statement about Wingarden being infatuated with his sister was clearly insufficient to accuse him of the double homicide. Therefore, the detectives had to continue searching and try to obtain some evidence. They decided to talk with other Wingarden family members and were very surprised. It turned out that Ryan's older sister Cheryl hadn't really been in contact with her brother for the past several years. They had quarreled after their father's death and hadn't even spoken for a long time. Then suddenly, after Ryan's police interrogation, the brother himself reached out to his older sister and suggested forgetting all grievances and reconciling. When detectives shared the information they received from Chris about Ryan harassing Gail with Cheryl, she was speechless and simply shocked. The woman had no idea such things could happen in her family. Cheryl speculated that Gail hadn't told her about Ryan's advances because she feared her older sister's reaction. The girl surely knew that Cheryl wouldn't stay quiet. She would confront their brother immediately. Then Cheryl recalled how at Gail and Rick's funeral, Ryan said some peculiar things. He said he could vividly imagine how it all happened, how the perpetrator walked down the hallway in the Brinks house and saw Gail lying in bed. Then her brother pondered if he could do something like that. At that time, Cheryl assumed Ryan was experiencing intense emotional pain from losing his younger sister and was just expressing his grief in that way. Further conversations with Ryan Wingarden's relatives and friends confirmed the information investigators received from his former girlfriend, Crystal Bann, and added several suspicious details to the overall picture. It turned out that Ryan had offered one of his friends to buy Gail's waterbed at a good price, the same bed where she lost her life. Additionally, he looked through his sister's personal letters after her death, found several messages from men and burned them, justifying that he didn't want other family members to see the letters. Another friend told police that Ryan had discussed his intimate relationship with Gail with him. Wingarden even managed to discuss this topic with his stepson. Ryan and Gail's aunt remembered that on the eve of the tragedy, both nephews called her complaining about each other. Gail was upset that her brother owed her money she had lent him for a car, and Ryan didn't like that his sister had suddenly distanced herself from the family after marriage, focusing only on her own affairs. She wouldn't allow their parents' mobile home to be placed on her property, where they were living with the younger children at the time, arguing that it wasn't safe while renovations were ongoing. All these peculiarities regarding Ryan Wingarden made investigators believe that he could indeed have some connection to the killing of Gail and Rick. However, the police still lacked physical evidence of his involvement in the case. They needed something more substantial, and therefore the detectives decided to talk to Ryan's wife again, as they were convinced that Pam knew more than she was saying. When brought in for questioning at the police station, the woman arrived accompanied by her husband. Compared to the very mild-mannered Pam, Ryan appeared harsh and domineering. He insisted on being present during his wife's interrogation, but wasn't allowed. His nervousness about this was apparent. The conversation with Pam lasted 3 hours. The woman needed some time to gather her thoughts and reveal that her husband's alibi was false. That day, they did go to the laundromat around 6 p.m. They came home no later than 8 p.m., but Ryan soon left again and Pam had no idea where to. Her husband returned only the next morning. At the time, they were having financial difficulties, and Ryan occasionally dealt illegal substances to make ends meet. So Pam assumed her husband might get into trouble if police learned about his illegal income. She provided an alibi, saying he was home with her all night. Ryan had forced her to maintain this alibi for many years. This was all the information the woman provided to investigators, and they couldn't get any further confessions from her. However, detectives saw there was something more to this story that Pam wasn't telling. Most likely her husband kept her under tight control, or she was simply afraid of her spouse. This was especially strange because Pam was the sole breadwinner. She worked full-time to support their family of 6, while her husband was a homemaker and homeschooled their children. After the 3-hour interrogation, Ryan was already knocking on doors demanding his wife's release. He himself refused to admit his alibi was false and kept insisting on the first version. He spent the entire night when Gail and Rick died in the marital bed. When Ryan was asked about what kind of relationship he had with his younger sister, the man was even offended. There was some initial awkwardness in the conversation, but then Ryan said that he and Gail were just 2 kids exploring each other. The couple was released home without providing any concrete information. And over the next few days, Ryan called Detective Blakely, leaving crazy voicemail messages. There were about 30 of them. Ryan said strange things, that he hated the police, but also valued them because they were a necessary evil. The man accused investigators of threatening his wife, while trying to uncover some dirty family history. This person was clearly unstable, and leaving him on city streets was unsafe. However, Detectives Blakely and Rapper still had no legal grounds to put Ryan behind bars. In January 2013, investigators called Pam to the police station for another interrogation. They told her they wouldn't back down until they got to the truth, and it was in her interest to tell the whole story and give closure to the deceased couple's relatives. This time Pam came without her husband and behaved much more calmly and openly. The woman finally told police the whole truth about that horrible night. Pam repeated that after the laundromat they returned home, then he left and came back only the next morning. At 9 a.m., Ryan started pounding on the door like a madman. When the woman let her boyfriend in, she saw he was crying. Ryan confessed that he had shot his younger sister and her husband. Naturally, Pam was shocked. At that time, she and Ryan had just started living together. Their relationship was exactly 3 months old. She was a single mother with a 6-month-old son. The man treated the boy very well and cared for him. And now, with one phrase, Ryan had destroyed all her hopes for a happy future together. Ryan went to Rick and Gail's house that evening to discuss family matters. First, he owed his sister money for the car payment. Second, he wanted to revisit the situation with their parents' mobile home. However, instead of constructive dialogue, they had a fierce argument, and Rick asked his wife's brother to leave their house and never return. An upset Gail went to the bedroom, and an enraged Ryan stormed out, but returned 20 minutes later saying his car wouldn't start. He asked Rick to get in his car and help him get onto the road. Once Rick was in the car, Ryan approached the open driver's side window and shot Rick twice in the head, then entered the house where Gail was sleeping and shot her 3 times in the face. Ryan explained to Pam that he didn't like his sister's behavior. After marriage, Gail seemed to forget about all her relatives. While Pam was processing this information, Ryan forced her into the car and drove to the Brinks' house. Grabbing one arm, he dragged the shocked woman first to the car, then forcibly into the house, to the bedroom where dead Gail lay. Ryan deliberately showed Pam the horrific scene because then he warned his girlfriend that if she ever told anyone about this, the same would happen to her and her son. Ryan took his girlfriend to his home and showed her the .22 caliber revolver he used during the crime, as well as a bag with blood-stained clothes. Ryan invented an alibi and, threatening violence, forced Pam to repeat it to police. The woman carried this terrible secret for the next 25 years. She attended Rick and Gail's funeral, interacted with grief-stricken relatives, knowing who had actually taken the young couple's lives. Pam couldn't tell anyone about what happened out of fear for herself and her son. Probably for the same reason, she married Ryan and had 3 more children with him. Ryan had so thoroughly intimidated Pam that he could completely manipulate her. She earned the family's living and feared contradicting her spouse in any way. The man called her at work daily to check what she was doing, wouldn't allow her to make friends. He controlled her every move, so essentially, this woman became another of Ryan's victims. Yet it's very difficult to accept that someone knew the truth and carefully concealed it for 25 years while Rick and Gail's families mourned and grieved for the deceased. After Pam's 3-hour police interrogation, when she admitted to the false alibi, Ryan called her a traitor and threatened to finish her off. Then, he changed his psychological pressure tactics and started convincing his wife that the detectives had clearly abused her and forced her to lie. The man even planned to sue the investigators for exceeding their authority and mistreating his wife, but limited himself to voice messages to one detective. While Pam sat at the police station telling the whole truth about that horrible night, Ryan continuously called and messaged her. During this time, he dialed his wife's number more than 100 times, so the detectives decided that Ryan needed to be taken into custody immediately before he harmed someone else. The criminal hiding the dark secret was arrested that same day to prevent him from disposing of any evidence or escaping. While Ryan was behind bars awaiting trial, He sent Pam 29 letters in which he accused her of lying, then begged her to recant her testimony. The trial of Ryan Wingarden began in March 2014. He was 51 years old at the time. The prosecution presented a case claiming the defendant killed his own sister and her husband out of fear that Gail would tell Rick about the incestuous relationship she had endured. Ryan envied his younger sister's success because she had managed to improve her standard of living while he experienced financial difficulties. During the trial, 60 witnesses testified against Ryan, with his wife Pam being the key witness. She confirmed everything she had told investigators during questioning. After that, Ryan jumped from his seat and started shouting that she was an evil woman with a black heart trying to slander him. As a result, the defendant was removed from his own trial. One of his cellmates revealed that while Ryan was in custody, he bragged about carrying out the killing of the Brink couple. He also talked about his sister Cheryl, who had campaigned for the past 25 years to solve the case of Gail and Rick's deaths. Ryan also stated that he would have finished off Cheryl long ago if he had known how much trouble his older sister would cause him. At the next court session, Ryan testified in his defense. His speech was incoherent. First and foremost, he wanted to dismiss the accusations of harassing his younger sister. The man stated that they were children then and were just interested in this peculiar game. Ryan described only 3 intimate incidents between him and Gail. The first time they were 9 and 12, respectively. They were naked in the shower, just comparing body parts. The second time, Ryan found a pipe with marijuana residue in their father's car. He and Gail tried lighting it and inhaling some smoke, after which they touched each other briefly. The third incident occurred when she was 12 and he was 15. Ryan was using marijuana again and made advances on Gail. They touched each other's intimate parts with their hands, but there was no sexual intercourse. All of this was consensual according to him. Ryan also stated he didn't consider their teenage experiences with his sister horrible. He wouldn't have cared if she had told her husband about it. So he claimed he had no motive to take both their lives. The defendant cried and seemed to genuinely not understand why his wife Pam and sister Cheryl testified against him. He believed authorities pressured the women, wanting to imprison him and pin the unsolved case on him. However hard Ryan's lawyers tried to twist the facts, their tactics failed. On March 28, 2014, Ryan was found guilty of taking Gail and Rick's lives. The judge sentenced him to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Even during the sentencing, Ryan constantly interrupted the judge, insisting on his innocence. Ryan Wingarden appealed his sentence 3 times, including to the Supreme Court, but all appeals were rejected. The only person dissatisfied with the sentence, besides the defendant, was Ryan and Gail's mother. The elderly woman didn't believe her son could take his own sister's life. One can understand her because almost any mother would defend her child to the end. It's just sad that, having many children, the mother missed some aspects of their upbringing. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.